On Mount Everest, the conditions are brutal. Violent winds blow snow up to 160 kilometers per hour, while the temperature drops to minus 34 degrees Celsius. Constant avalanches and blizzards make climbing a real risk. With its 8,849 meters of altitude, this is the highest mountain in the world. To reach the top, climbers spend months, even years, preparing, but they don't always come back. More than 300 people have died in the attempt. Everest is one of the most extreme challenges on the planet. But what if I told you there was an equivalent in the ocean? A place as deadly as the world's highest mountain. Where storms sweep everything in their path, giant waves come out of nowhere, and shipwrecks are inevitable. An inhospitable territory that has swallowed up more than 800 ships and taken around 10,000 lives. Such a place exists, and it's called Cape Horn. For centuries, this extreme tip of southern Chile has been a real nightmare for sailors. There, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans collide chaotically, creating a scenario that was once considered the greatest terror of world navigation. If Everest challenges climbers who try to master it, Cape Horn challenges sailors who dare to cross its waters. But what makes this point so dangerous? And why has it cost so many lives? Today, Bello Mundo is going to take you to one of the most extreme places on the planet. Hold on tight because this journey promises to be turbulent. Number 1. Location and geographical data. If there is a true end of the world, it's here. At the southern tip of South America, where the continent simply ends and gives way to a relentless ocean, is Cape Horn. Located on Hornos Island in the archipelago of Tierra del Fuego, Chile, this isolated piece of land marks the meeting of the Atlantic and the Pacific. And it's not a friendly encounter. Forget that image of calm seas and golden sunsets. Cape Horn's real calling card is a scene of violent storms, biting winds and gigantic waves that have swallowed hundreds of ships. It's no exaggeration to say that this region was once a navigator's greatest nightmare. When Charles Darwin passed through the area in 1834, he described the landscape in an uninviting way. The sight of these coasts is enough to make a landsman have nightmares for a week of shipwrecks, dangers, and death. Now imagine facing that with a sailboat, no engine, no modern technology, just sails and courage. For centuries, this is how sailors tried to cross Cape Horn, and many of them were never seen again. If you've ever heard someone say that they've sailed around Cape Horn in a sailboat, you can be sure they've done the nautical equivalent of climbing Everest in mountaineering. Number 2. History. The story of Cape Horn begins with a commercial rivalry and a daring plan. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Dutch West India Company had an iron grip on maritime trade in the region of the Straits of Magellan, the only known passage to the Pacific Ocean without having to go all the way around Africa. This monopoly annoyed many merchants who had to pay very high fees to navigate the route. Unlike many discoveries made by explorers or scientists, the origin of Cape Horn had nothing to do with a scientific mission or heroic adventure. It was pure commercial strategy and, above all, boycott. It all started with a man called Isaac Lemaire, one of the shareholders of the powerful Dutch West India Company, the world's first megacorporation, which monopolized the interoceanic routes and controlled trade between Europe and the Orient with an iron fist. But Lemaire, instead of profiting peacefully from the company, ended up becoming one of its greatest enemies. He wanted to break the monopoly. He wanted to find a new route between the oceans that didn't pass through the Strait of Magellan, avoiding the company's abusive taxes and strict controls. And so, in 1616, he organized an expedition with two ships, the Eendracht and the Horn, putting his own son, Jacob Lemaire, in charge. The mission: to discover a new route and sabotage the Company of the Indies business. In January of that year, after braving stormy seas and rounding the tip of South America, Jacob and his crew achieved their feat. They proved that there was indeed an alternative route linking the Atlantic to the Pacific. The young navigator headed west, crossing the entire Pacific Ocean until he reached Indonesia. But instead of receiving a hero's welcome, he was captured by the men of the India Company. There was no celebration, there was no medal. The only welcome he got was an arrest warrant and the seizure of his boat. Jacob died on the journey home, but his father, Isaac, continued to fight against the company, trying to overthrow the monopoly of what was, for a long time, the largest commercial corporation on the planet. And what about the name of the cable? Well, it was named not after the navigator, but after one of the expedition's boats, the Horn, which unfortunately caught fire and sank in the middle of the journey. The curious thing is that, in Spanish, the translation ended up becoming Cabo de Hornos, which many people think is related to ovens or heat. But in reality, it has nothing to do with that. The name comes from the Dutch town of Hoorn, the birthplace of the lost ship. And so it was that a mixture of ambition, betrayal, and commercial resistance put this cape on the map, turning it into one of the most legendary and deadly sea passages on the planet. And now the question arises, why, after all, did Cape Horn gain such a sinister reputation? Number 3. The reputation as a dangerous place. Cape Horn doesn't have the reputation of a sailor's graveyard for nothing. Many believe that the reason lies only in the frequent storms, but the danger goes far beyond that. Everything here conspires against sailors: relentless winds, colossal waves, freezing temperatures, and a treacherous terrain. The latitude says it all: 56 degrees south. This means that this extreme tip of South America is closer to Antarctica than to the rest of the continent, which means it's cold all year round. But don't think of a stable polar climate, with frozen landscapes and accumulated snow. The humidity is intense, the rain and hail are constant, and the winds are so aggressive that they prevent any prolonged accumulation of ice on the ground. However, in the colder months, stray icebergs from Antarctica appear there, floating like ominous shadows on the horizon. Now, about the winds. They're not just strong, they're legendary. That's because Cape Horn is located exactly inside one of the most feared areas by sailors, the so-called Furious 50s. But what makes this region so brutal? In the southern hemisphere, between latitudes 40 and 60, the winds blow without encountering land barriers, unlike in the northern hemisphere, where large continents cut off the air currents. Here, however, there are no obstacles. It's a real atmospheric corridor where the winds gain strength, reaching absurd speeds. And guess where this whirlwind meets a geographical strait that amplifies its power even more? Exactly in the Drake Strait, the natural funnel between South America and Antarctica. The result? Wind gusts that exceed 150 kilometers per hour, storms that appear without warning, as if the ocean had decided to punish anyone who dares to cross it. What's worse, these storms can last for days, leaving boats completely at the mercy of the sea. The waves are a spectacle in themselves. At Cape Horn, the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean collide with full force, creating a veritable maritime battlefield. The masses of water travel thousands of kilometers without interruption, and when they reach this region, they encounter an irregular and abrupt ocean floor, which causes the waves to double in size out of nowhere. Some exceed 20 meters in height, enough to swallow entire ships and capsize any vessel that isn't prepared. Now, imagine trying to navigate in this environment with reduced visibility, surrounded by dense fog, while the thermometer registers temperatures below zero and the sea turns into a maelstrom of chaos. This is the reality of Cape Horn, one of the few places on the planet where the ocean itself seems intent on challenging anyone who tries to cross it. Given all this, it's not hard to understand why, for centuries, this was the most feared stretch of sea for navigators. And as if all these challenges weren't enough, Cape Horn still holds another frightening statistic. Hundreds of ships have sunk here, and thousands of sailors have never returned home. And it's exactly these tragic stories that we'll talk about next. Number 4. The Sailor's Cemetery. If there is one place in the world that has made thousands of sailors say their last prayers, it is Cape Horn. Over the centuries, more than 800 vessels have been swallowed up by these brutal waters, taking something like 10,000 lives with them. And when we talk about shipwrecks here, it's not just small fishing boats or fearless sailing ships. Even large warships and imposing commercial vessels have succumbed to the power of this ocean. The 19th century was one of the deadliest periods for those who had to cross this region. At that time, the Panama Canal did not yet exist, so the only way to connect the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of the Americas was to go around the south of the continent. This meant that ships laden with goods, gold, military supplies, and even migrants had to brave the colossal winds and waves of the Horn. And the result? Many of them never made it home. And worst of all, there wasn't even a safe port nearby. Unlike other routes where sailors could seek shelter in protected bays or quiet islands, Cape Horn offered no refuge at all. If a storm came out of nowhere, and it always did, the sailors had only two options: face the fury of the ocean or hope that the storm passed before the ship was torn apart. There are countless tales of despair and destruction. One of the most famous is that of the San Telmo, an imposing Spanish warship that attempted to cross the Horn at the beginning of the 19th century. In the middle of the crossing, the ship lost its rudder and became completely adrift, being pushed violently into the treacherous waters of the south. The fate was cruel. More than 600 sailors disappeared and the ship was never found. Months later, pieces of the ship turned up on a nearby island, serving as a macabre reminder of what happens to those who unsuccessfully challenge the Horn. Another famous shipwreck was that of the frigate Rix, a ship that seemed to have been doomed since it was built. It changed owners so many times that it didn't even keep its original name. Built in Russia, sold to Spain, then to Chile, and finally bought by Argentina, it was renamed the Buenos Aires. But this cost savings. In 1823, while trying to cross the Horn, it was brutally broken in half by a devastating storm, dragging more than 500 crew members to the bottom of the sea. And these are just some of the tragic stories. From the first explorers to modern vessels, Cape Horn has been one of the most lethal stretches of sea on the planet. It is said that those who survive this crossing are entitled to wear a golden earring in their left ear and can even piss against the wind without fear, a nautical tradition that only the bravest can boast. But for those who weren't so lucky, the Horn continues to reaffirm its dark reputation, reminding us that the real captain there is the ocean, not the men. Number 5. The Albatross Monument. With so many lives claimed by Cape Horn, it was only a matter of time before someone decided to erect a memorial to the sailors who never came home. And that's exactly what happened. In 1992, the Confraternity of Cape Horn Captains unveiled a solitary and symbolic monument on Hornos Island, one of the last pieces of dry land before the icy expanse of Antarctica. At first glance, it looks like two cut metal plates, but when viewed from the right angle, they form the silhouette of an albatross. And this choice was no accident. For sailors, the albatross is more than just a seabird. It represents the souls of those who died at sea, always flying without ever touching the ground again. And as if the presence of this monument wasn't already striking enough, next to it is a plaque with a poem by Sarah Weil, which sends shivers down the spine of anyone who reads it under the piercing winds of the Horn. I am the albatross waiting for you at the end of the world. I am the forgotten soul of the dead sailors who crossed Cape Horn from every sea on earth. But they didn't die in the furious waves. Today they fly on my wings to eternity in the last crack of the Antarctic winds. Now imagine reading these verses while the wind howls around you, the waves roar in the distance, and the gray sky makes everything even more dramatic. It's a unique and indescribable experience. But there is one detail. Getting to this monument is not easy. Even those who buy cruise ships to visit Cape Horn can end up frustrated. If the sea is too rough, and it almost always is, the captains simply cancel the landing. In other words, you can sail for days, get very close to the island, see the monument from afar, and, in the end, hear the dreaded phrase from the captain. Unfortunately, we can't go down today, and there's no point in complaining. At Cape Horn, it's not man who makes the rules, it's the sea. For these reasons and others, Cape Horn is considered the Mount Everest of sailing, because overcoming it is almost never easy. And an old sailor's saying helps explain why. Below 40 degrees latitude, there is no law. Below 50, where the Horn is, there is no God. So, did you feel the adrenaline rush? If you enjoyed this dive to the end of the world, here's an invitation to explore more curiosities. In the next episode of Bello Mundo, we'll explore other exotic places, full of adventures and surprising stories. Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Would you dare to sail around Cape Horn, or would you rather enjoy the view from somewhere warmer and quieter? Let us know in the comments. Watch Snake Island in China and find out if it's possible to get out of the most dangerous place in the world alive. Just click on the video that appears on your screen and we'll see you there. Thank you very much for following us and see you on your next adventure.